Tuesday, the 10th of March. I'm pleased to be joined today by Jacques Baud. Jacques is a former Swiss military strategic intelligence analyst and commentator on things military kind of strategic, including in the context of the war in Ukraine, but other matters too. He's written some very good books on this, which you should certainly look up. And he's most famous more recently for having been sanctioned by the European Union for having different views to theirs on the situation in the Ukraine war. Jacques, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So we were talking just before we came online about the kind of the real world human consequences for you as somebody who lives in Europe. You live in Brussels, right? Yeah, of being sanctioned. I mean, how has it been for you since mid-December when the EU unfairly, in my view, imposed sanctions on you? I mean, just living when all of your bank accounts are frozen.
Oh, this is a very strange and peculiar situation. In fact, the effect of a sanction is to ban me from traveling, meaning that I'm not able to, in theory, I wouldn't be able to enter EU territory. Since I'm living in EU, I'm not allowed to travel within the EU, meaning that I'm not allowed to go back to Switzerland, for instance. I have to ask for permission to cross the border, the border between Belgium and France, Belgium with Luxembourg and things like that, requiring requests to these governments. And then once I'm in Switzerland, I would probably not be able to go back to my home, which is in Brussels, meaning that so far I haven't asked for travel permission, meaning that I'm still confined to Belgium. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect, and probably the most disturbing one, is the fact that I don't have any access. My bank accounts in the EU are frozen. I mean, I just have one bank account in Belgium, and this is frozen, meaning that I cannot use it. I cannot access my bank account. I can't make payment. I can't buy food. I can't buy anything, basically. My bank card has been disabled. And therefore, there is no way I can buy. I cannot even obviously draw or get money from the ATM machine or things like that. So that means that since December, essentially, I live exclusively out of the generosity of some friends who bring me food every week. And I cannot, I have a little bit of cash that allow me to buy small things like a bread or things like that. But that's it. That's how I am since mid-December. That's almost 4 months now. I was granted a so-called humanitarian derogation or exemption by the Belgium Ministry of Finance early February, on the 6th of February. And this exemption would allow me to access my Belgian bank account in a limited way. That means that I have a limited amount that I can access, and for a limited amount of time until June. The interesting thing is that although the decision has been made on early February, it has not been implemented yet by the ING Belgium bank, meaning that in essence, despite having the authorization from the ministry, I am still in the same situation. So no change in practical term. There have been no change in my situation since December last year.
So you basically got no money, and even though the Belgian government has said that you can have money, the bank is refusing or just delaying, or why is the bank?
Well, I think, and there's another thing that happened also in Switzerland. Although Switzerland has not adopted these sanctions because this is a regime that affects the freedom of speech. And this is something that Switzerland doesn't accept. Therefore, they have not adopted the sanction. However, I have bank accounts in Switzerland. But the bank, as of a precautionary measure, has decided also to freeze my bank account. So it's kind of reputation management. And I think it's something very similar that is happening in Belgium, that the bank themselves decide beyond what is required by law, decide to freeze your bank accounts just for the sake of their reputation. The problem is, and that's something that I have also stated to the Swiss bank, I said, well, if you're sanctioned because you're a terrorist or you launder, you do money laundering or part of some mafia or things like that, I can understand that the reputation of the bank is at stake, and therefore they tend to cut any relationship with you if you have such a criminal case. My situation is slightly different because, first of all, I have not been in a trial. This is not a judiciary or legal a judiciary decision. It is a political decision, point one. And second, it is because of my freedom of speech. Therefore, the reputation of the bank here is suddenly must be understood in a completely different context. And if you look on the internet, by the way, you can see that now it has spread the news that UBS Bank has frozen my account, has spread very quickly across the world because UBS is a very well-known Swiss bank, and the bank on its own initiative has decided to sanction me, in fact, for freedom of speech. And that is exactly then the reputation management then is almost upside down. I mentioned the case of the Swiss bank because my lawyers have been able to talk to the bank and made them understood that this is the problem. I mean, I'm not a criminal. I'm someone who has been condemned for freedom of speech, and therefore it's not to the benefit of the bank to sanction me again. Therefore, the Swiss bank has now backpedaled on that and is on the process of reverse course on that decision. I'm not yet able to access my bank account fully in Switzerland, but at least I have not been expelled from the bank, which is already something positive. And I can receive, because my pension was paid on my Swiss bank account. And initially, my pension was refused by the bank in February, meaning that I didn't receive my pension. Now the bank has decided that it's okay, so therefore things are probably returning to almost normal in Switzerland. But it shows how beyond the mere sanction case, you have also kind of a spillover effect of the sanctions where you have private industries or companies having their own dynamics just to protect themselves. So you have a kind of a terroristic effect of the sanction, and in the fear of being affected themselves, the banks prefer to expel people or to restrict their access to bank account. Now, the fact that my bank account in Switzerland has been partly returned to normal, I cannot get money from this bank account. I mean, if I were in Switzerland, that would be no problem. But since I'm living in the EU, I cannot access my Swiss bank account from outside of Switzerland. So in essence, there is not much use. But in theory, according to the humanitarian derogation, I could transfer some amount of money from my Swiss bank account to the Belgium bank account. But here again, the Belgian bank ING has probably based on this idea of reputation management, has not yet implemented the decision of the Minister of Finance. Therefore, I cannot transfer money to my Belgium account, and therefore I have no access to money anyway. So we see that the sanctions are just one aspect of the problem, but you have everything that come out of this. I mean, as I said, the spillover effect of the sanction that can affect you. It's the same, for instance, as my book in France. There is a huge bookstore that's called Fnac that has bookstores almost everywhere in Europe, in the French-speaking Europe. They have, on their own initiative, withdrawn all my books from the shelves, meaning that they don't sell my books anymore, although there is no restriction in the sanction whatsoever. So that's their own decision based on the fear they have of the European Union. So it's literally European Union is managing by terror somehow.
Yeah. Why do they pick on you?
Well, it's a good question. I my explanation, but again, there is no official explanation so far. But apparently, my name was put on the list by the French government. And my explanation for that is that the real target of the French government was another guy who is on the same sanction list. It's Xavier Moreau, and he's living in Russia. He's married to a Russian woman, and he has also Russian citizenship. He lives in Moscow, and he works there, has also some relation with RT, so the media, the media outlet in Russia. And my personal view is that he is the one the French government wanted to sanction. But in order to do that, that would be the first time that the French government sanctions its own citizen. And therefore, in order to water down the decision, they wanted also to sanction another French-speaking person. You have a lot of other French commentators in France, but of course, the idea was to water down the decision of targeting French citizens. Therefore, they had to take somebody else. And among the French speakers, the French speaking commentators, I'm probably the one who is probably the best known. I don't know, but I assume so. And therefore, they selected me for that, assuming probably that I was living in Switzerland, and therefore that I might not be affected by the sanctions as I'm now. And because then if I were living in Switzerland, I would have a status, I mean, I would experience the sanctions in the same way Xavier Moreau is experiencing them in Russia. But that was obviously a miscalculation, and I'm here just in the core of the problem of the sanctions. I consider myself as a collateral damage of the decision of the French government. I may be wrong. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea because if you read the comments on the video I make and on my book and all that, people don't consider me as an extremist or as a let's say partisan for Russia or whoever. In fact, in some comments, I could see that people consider me as pro-Ukrainian. So I try to have a balanced analysis of the situation. I'm not condemning anybody because that's also the habit we have since about 25 years to condemn people. You have to condemn this one, you have to condemn this party, you have to condemn this government, this. So I'm not condemning anybody. I'm just explaining how it works. I'm explaining. I'm not a partisan neither for Russia nor for Ukraine. I'm just explaining what they do. So I don't consider myself as a propaganda. In fact, I even refused when I was invited on Russian media to for interviews and things like that. I refused these invitations. And I explained why, because I didn't want my analysis to be considered as propaganda. So I made every effort to avoid to be a propagandist. And I think most people who are reading my books and things like that agree with this. Therefore, that's a reason why I don't consider myself as a primary target of the French government, but as a collateral damage because probably Xavier Moreau was the main target of the government.
What do you think that sanctions are trying to achieve as an outcome from imposing them? What do you think is the purpose of these sanctions?
There are different interpretation of that, and of course, a lot of people say that it was done on purpose to scare people and avoid comments and all that. Maybe. I don't know. My personal view and my personal theory is that, as I said before, they didn't expect me to live within the EU because if you look at the sanctions, I'm considered as a Swiss person, and it's very unusual to have Swiss living in Europe. Usually it's Europeans living in Switzerland, and not Swiss people living in, especially in Belgium. People are always surprised when I said I'm living in Belgium. They say, oh, usually it's the opposite. In any case, that's probably also something. They didn't expect me to live in the EU. Now, it's also important to understand at this stage that these sanctions are, are in fact, a foreign policy measure. They were decided not by some judge or in a tribunal or the court or whoever you in a judiciary system. The decision of the sanctions was taken by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the European Union, in fact, the Council of the European Union, and that underlines the fact that those sanctions are designed as a foreign policy measure. And as if you look at the list of the sanction that was published on the 15th of December 2025, you can see that there are 59 individuals and entities who are on this list. I'm the only one who lives in the EU. So essentially, this was a measure taken against people living outside of the EU. I'm an accident in that sense. And therefore, that's the reason why I think that the EU had not anticipated that. And now it finds itself into a very peculiar situation. Because when you take a decision, a foreign policy measure, you can go outside of your own law system, if I put it that way, because you address people who are outside. I mean, the best example or most extreme example, if you want, is the extrajudiciary killings, for instance, that you can do because you feel that you're at war outside, and therefore you're allowed to kill people outside of your territory, but on your territory where your law is applicable, this wouldn't be allowed. So we are exactly in the same kind of situation. These sanctions are designed to be implemented or applied outside of the EU. Now, the issue is that I am within the EU, and that creates a precedent in that situation because this has not. I mean, there have been similar examples before, but not as blatant as my case. And that's why a lot of people think that my case should be considered as an example and it should be considered as a precedent that we would avoid for the future. That's a reason also why so many people have mobilized themselves against my case, because that means that the EU, even if it was not the primary intention for me, it could in the future be a regular measure, if you want. If you want to silence someone without going through a court, then you can use these foreign policy measures. And that's very important, because when you have a normal legal process, you have an accusation, claims and things like that, and you have a process where and the aim of the process is to validate or not the accusation. And that therefore you have a lawyer, you have all that in order to present the case, to defend the case, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the process, you have or have not a sanction. Now, in my case, it's exactly the opposite, because there have been no legal process whatsoever. There's no court, no judge, no lawyer, nothing. It was just upfront decided that Jacques Baud would be sanctioned, period. And now we have to start a kind of process saying, well, that was not justified. So it's not the normal legal process. It's an upside down process, if you want. And that means that with this system of sanction, you don't need to demonstrate that the person is guilty. You just decide a sanction, period. And and that's why my case is a case that is so blatantly against any human rights and procedures that we have in the EU, in any country. And that goes beyond the fact that, even if, according to the European Union, I'm a propagandist for Russia and things like this, even propaganda is not a crime. I mean, in any country, by the way, probably except in the time of war. But EU has not declared itself at war. So again, this idea of propagandist doesn't hold water. And even if you make disinformation, unless this disinformation can harm someone, even disinformation is not a crime. Even if, in my case, there is absolutely, in the old documents that we have received that are supposed to support the claim of the European Union, there is not a single accusation that in fact supports what is on the sanction list. Not a single, not a quote of me, nothing. So it's a completely empty accusation that has been decided. I mean, this is just, and that's also something that surprises me as a former intelligence officer, because in intelligence, obviously, you are trained to get information, check your information. You even what to say, evaluate the information you have. You evaluate the source and so on and so forth. So the analysis is a very complex issue in intelligence. And here I can see that the European Union can decide upon just gossips. But really gossips, not more than this. There are allegations that have said something, but there is none of the accusation is documented properly, or documented even. So, meaning that this kind of process of using sanctions in absence of any court or judgment or things like that allows to condemn anybody without considering what it may be innocent. So
Yeah.
we are in it's a very dangerous situation, I think. But I'm not sure it is just a result of a miscalculation rather than a smart calculus, if you want. That's my personal view of that. I may be wrong. A lot of people understand it differently, and fortunately to some extent, because now they are very much involved and very much engaged in, for my case, because they think that the EU used that as a way to silence other, let's say, other voices, let's say.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know a lot about sanctions because I authorized many of the British sanctions against Russia at the start of the war in Ukraine. That's my job. I'm not making excuses for it. That's, I retired from the diplomatic service because I thought the policy was a complete failure. But at a kind of strategic levels, sanctions are intended, certainly British sanctions, and I think they're largely the same as European sanctions, are intended to kind of get Russia to stop its actions in Ukraine. Now, firstly, they never have, and they've never looked likely to. But it becomes very quickly ridiculous when you see that actually, just sanctioning could have retired intelligence analysts, don't go any way to serve that purpose. By sanctioning you, Vladimir Putin doesn't care a jot that you've been sanctioned or anybody else has been sanctioned. He's going to carry on regardless. So the purpose of sanctions can't be fulfilled by just sanctioning people who have a different, opinion from the government. And on your point about the kind of extrajudicial kind of nature of these things, there was a Supreme Court decision in the UK last year which ruled in favour of the government, and it basically ruled that the courts were not in a position to kind of double guess what the executive branch decided when it came to sanctions. So now, certainly in the UK, there's absolutely no judicial control over sanctions at all. And I happen to know that in authorising sanctions, they are normally, in most cases, on very, very flimsy evidence, screenshots of this article published online, and that sort of thing. So the whole thing is built on foundations of both legal and moral sand, that we can sanction people who just disagree with our government line, and which doesn't change anything at all on the ground in Ukraine, and it's desperately unfair. How does it make you feel though? Because I must admit, I worry about being sanctioned. Hopefully I won't be sanctioned, but I do worry about it. I worry about the impact on my reputation, about my family life, and things like that. How does it make you feel? Just like, because we think about the practical consequences, not being able to access your bank accounts, needing to rely on, the kindness of people to kind of bring you food, and the help from your sister to give you a bit of cash, from time to time. But how does it make you feel to be in the global spotlight, and as somebody who's been sanctioned?
Well, obviously, that is a rather uncomfortable feeling, obviously. Um, But on the other hand, you also see, for instance, it's very interesting now in Brussels when I get out of my house just to go buying some stuff or things like that. It systematically every day, every time I go out of my home, I meet someone on the sidewalk who greets me and say that they are with me. So my case is known by almost everybody. And that's extremely, on the one hand, it helps a little bit because you understand that people understand your position, understand who you are. That attract a lot of also visitors on my videos and my books. I think in the United States, I mean, the English speaking world, my books have boomed literally. Uh, as Judge Napolitano just said just a couple of days ago, I'm the most famous sanctionees of the world, so a sanctioned person of the world. So that that has some positive aspects, if you want. But on the negative side, I mean, on the positive side, I would say again, I'm out of the my active life, if you want. I'm retired, so my career is not influenced by that. I have no problem. It has almost no impact on my social life, if you want, uh, with the difference that I cannot invite someone to the restaurant or things like that. But otherwise, it doesn't really affect my social and professional life because this life is behind me to some extent. As a result, I'm not sure that, as you rightly said, that there is a benefit for the European Union having somebody like me sanctioned. It just highlights the fact that in the European Union you can bypass the basic human rights because that's exactly what's happening. And this is, you can even say that it's even counterproductive because The European Union has based its action against Russia under the label of the fight for the European values and things like that, democracy and freedom and blah, 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 blah. But then my case shows that it's exactly the opposite. Basically, you deny the basic human rights to people living within the EU itself. Therefore, that makes the whole argument of fighting for values, that gives then suddenly a different flavor to that. So yes, it's uncomfortable, definitely. I never asked for having such a situation. But on the other hand, if it helps to improve the situation at large, well, it's probably a good thing. Not that I recommend the sanctions, but we probably needed to have a first case to improve the global situation. Personally, I find that the sanctions as an instrument are not suited for the kind of problem we want to solve. You were in the Foreign Service. I have been also advisor to the Foreign Ministry in my country. And I can see today that sanctions have become an instrument of foreign policy much more than it was, let's say, 30 or 40 years ago. And diplomacy, the old-fashioned diplomacy, has almost disappeared. And we see now the crisis we have with Iran, with Palestine, with Russia. I mean, we see that in Europe, at least, this old-fashioned diplomacy has no real place, in fact, or the diplomacy cannot find its place because we have, in fact, we have used the sanctions as a substitute for diplomacy. And my case is just a case in point. It's just a small tip of the iceberg, probably. But it shows that we add sanctions and over sanction and things like that without having the slightest result. And we keep doubling down, triple down, and so on and so forth. So what do we want really to achieve? So my case is probably an example of how useless are the sanctions and how detrimental are the sanctions just for ourselves, for our society. A lot of people have lost faith for instance, Switzerland. Switzerland is not part of the EU, as you know, but we have a couple of agreements, bilateral agreements with EU countries, and we have to vote next year on how to say that, an agreement to get closer to the EU. Let's put it that way.
Huh?
But now a lot of people in Switzerland have told me, well, when I see what happens to you, there's no way I will vote in favor of such an agreement. We don't want to be like the EU. And of course, in Switzerland, as you know, we are extremely proud of our way of understanding democracy. We're extremely proud of having all these instruments that are almost unique in the world, that every citizen can propose a law or asked to vote on almost not every law, but every major law that is adopted in Switzerland. The people must vote on it. So we're very proud of this. But when we see the neighboring EU having unilateral sanctions on individuals who are not terrorists or criminal and things like that, without any criminal or legal process, people say, no, that's not the society we want. So these sanctions have, in fact, an extremely negative impact on the way the Swiss perceive the EU now. And my case has been, of course, been advertised quite extensively by those parties who are against more or closer rapprochement with the EU. And my case have become extremely popular in Switzerland. So what is, at the end of the day, the benefit for the EU? I don't see it because I'm not a propagandist. So they are not silencing a propagandist. They are not silencing someone who is pro-Russian because I've never said that I was pro-Russian. Um, but on the opposite, on the other hand, they are in fact demonstrating that they have undemocratic, non-democratic processes to sanction people. They have demonstrated that the issue of human rights is not an issue or something that you can handle at with a double standard. Human rights should not be handled at double standard. I have no problem if we condemn and what's happening in different countries and things like that. But if you want to condemn governments to misuse the human rights or whatever, or not even using them, you have to be very clean yourself. If you start yourself to bypass the human rights just to for convenience, then your whole narrative towards those countries that we qualify as authoritative, authoritarian, dictatorial, whatever, all this narrative crumbles. And that's exactly where we are.
Yeah.
So
It's just incredibly sad. I mean, having personally sanctioned lots of people, I mean, it's just a human. I mean, it's a human tragedy, really. Um, that you've been penalised in this way. Sanctions have. I mean, if sanctions worked, then the war in Ukraine would have finished in early 2022. But the reason it didn't finish was because people like Boris Johnson and Victoria Nuland encouraged Zelensky to keep fighting, and sanctions have never looked likely to end the war, in Ukraine, and I suspect they never will because Russia's had so many sanctions imposed, and as you say, people like you are just like collateral damage, and it's so unfair. So yeah, I just I'm it's the flip side, I suppose, is it brings out the real humanity that people are so kind to you in circumstances where you've got no money. I mean, it's just quite remarkable. It must kind of be a small, upside to this that actually, people recognize the truth. More people want access to realistic voices, not state propaganda. More people question, the kind of increasingly anti-democratic behavior of their governments, who, as you say, have a foreign policy shaped on, clamping down on so-called authoritarian regimes in different parts of the world. So, I'm sort of, I really kind of feel sorry for you, but I'm amazed that you are so stoic and you're remaining so positive about the whole experience. I mean, I'm not sure that I'd be able to do the same. I think you've been incredibly courageous.
I'm trying to do my best, but there's also something, you cannot fight the problem. You have to understand that this is a solution. I'm very confident that at the end of the day, I will win because, as I said, there is no consistent accusation against me. There is no actually accusation that demonstrates the allegations against me. So I'm very confident that at the end of the day, I will win. This is absolutely no problem. And the more we wait, the more my win, my with quotation mark victory will be bigger. Had the EU acknowledged very quickly that it was a mistake and had silently removed the sanction or removed me from the list of sanctions, nobody would have talked about it. But now it has taken more its own dynamics in some way, and people talk more and more about my case, and that will increase with the time. So I'm confident it will work. Of course, it's a unfortunate situation for me, but again, I'm also fortunate that I don't have debt. I don't have financial issues that, of course, I don't have money, but at the same time, I don't have a family to take care of. I don't have debt. I don't have things like that that would, in fact, make my situation almost untenable. I'm in a situation that I don't have a lot of expenditure. I can live very simply. I have all my books behind me, and that's all I need, just to make it very simple. So uh, this my personal situation is such that yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's unfortunate. Yes, it's unjust, clearly, and unjustified. But I am in a position to sustain and to be resilient enough to sustain the blow and to counter the blow. And that will be the case because fight back. They are already now, we have started to indict people of the Swiss government, for instance, because they made very silly claims. So I counterattack to any people who have to attack me because I can do that. So I'm in a position. I know that I'm on the right side. So there is no. I have no problem counterattacking, and that gives me some. That helps me to to support or to be resilient in this situation. So.
Well, good luck in everything that you do, Jacques. My thoughts are with you. I'm really thankful for everybody that's helped you. I'm glad, in a way, if one can be glad in these unfair circumstances, that this is mobilizing people's attention on the manifest unfairness and failure of sanctions. And you are, a big fighter in that cause. And long may your profile kind of grow, and build, and your campaign, ultimately succeed. So thanks so much for taking the time. I'm genuinely humbled to talk to you, given how strongly you're standing up in these very, very difficult circumstances. All praise to you and everybody that helps you, Jacques.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for raising also attention on my case. This is very useful. Thank you very much.
And let's talk again, at some point in the future. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.